Hello and welcome to another episode of Global Tantrum, the show where two or more political science PhDs try to explain the post-war era first to ourselves and then hopefully to you. My name is Steve Halley. I am your host. With me, as always, is our co-host, Professor Galen Jackson of Williams College. Galen, what's the latest? How you doing, man?
Kind of dragging today, man. Not gonna
Yeah.
lie. Decided to skip the gym even though it was gonna be chest day. That's how tired I am.
Chest day. I thought you said chest day for a second. I feel your pain, and we've been having smoke alarm issues at 3 in the morning, which is a really excellent way to wreck your entire week.
Sounds terrible.
Yeah, it's not good. I don't recommend it. I'll tell you who else has been having a terrible week. Whoever was supposed to be negotiating in Islamabad over the deal that's supposed to end the Iran war. We'll start there this week for a quick check-in because we have been
Yeah.
talking about for like the last several months. The Iran war seems to be on hold still because President Trump has unilaterally extended the ceasefire, even though it was supposed to be up, I think, on Tuesday, right? We're recording on Thursday.
Either Tuesday or Wednesday, I can't
Yeah,
remember.
it's like 9 p.m. Eastern
Yeah.
Standard Time Tuesday or something. But he was like, "Yeah, no, we're going to extend that. We're going to try to get back to the negotiating table." And so the double blockade persists. And what's your take on this?
My take is largely what has been reported in most of the major news outlets, which is the Iranians think Trump just blinked, and
Hmm.
I tend to agree with that. With the caveat, as we have discussed at length, that they are feeling an enormous amount of pain,
For sure.
particularly ordinary Iranians. And there's been some good reporting on just how awful Iran's economy is right now and how much it's going to take to reconstruct the country. That said, I think the people in power who, as we have said, now are, I would say, much more hardline than the previous government, or at least somewhat more hardline than the previous government, they think they can wait Trump out on this.
Yep.
And as we heard from our friend Pasha Madavi last week, if this drags out, then it will start to bite much more than it already has. So
Hmm.
I think that's what they're banking on. The other thing of note, which we've covered a bit, is the situation in Lebanon, where the Lebanese government naturally wants Israel to withdraw from this, as they call it, security buffer zone. And this seems like a real redux of 1982. So I think that front is somewhat more fragile.
Hmm.
But for now, I think overall it's kind of like a stalemate.
It's a
And
stalemate.
who's going
And
to be willing to suffer more pain?
yeah, ties good with the defender. The Iranians can't get the money they need to run their economy. And there's been more reporting around the war damage that's been inflicted. The US Israeli joint strikes dismantled all of Iran's heavy industry. It's like their steel, other chemicals, their refining capabilities, like all the things that like basically their economy was built on. So that's a big problem for them. And it's not like the regime can hold on perhaps indefinitely, but like people need to eat. So they need foreign exchange. We're trying to stop that from happening. They have workarounds. Pasha indicated that he thought June would be kind of the inflection point for this. It's not June. So,
Summer is coming.
yeah, summer's coming. We hope we don't see a resumption in hostilities, but honestly, that could happen at any time. So, anyway, we'll keep tabs on that situation, but we're actually going to go back and discuss something pretty darn important that happened while the Iran war was still happening. So, we kind of, we didn't talk about it. There were more important things going on, but like, we want to go back and really dig into the Claude Mythos situation. Now, on this show, we've talked several times in the past about cybersecurity issues and AI issues. And I think that in those shows, we kind of aligned on this doomsday scenario that some experts have promulgated, whereby cybercrime, cyber terror, cyber operations by state combine with frontier cutting edge AI capabilities to unleash a cyber doomsday. And that has not happened. It may not happen, but we got a little bit of a warning shot earlier in April with the reporting and release of Claude Mythos preview and Project Glasswing. Now, Anthropic is one of only a handful of frontier AI labs. By many respects, it has surged to take pole position in terms of usage, in terms of revenue. Everybody is Claude coding now, including me. All of this has happened literally within the last 6 and probably more like 3 months. It's gone really, really, really fast. These guys went from $9 billion in recurring revenue at the end of quarter 4 to $30 billion in annual recurring revenue by the end of quarter 1. By most accounts, this is the fastest revenue growth in the history of like modern American business. You could go back and maybe look at like Standard Oil or something like that. But in terms of just like raw acceleration, we've never seen anything like this before. So Anthropic and its CEO, Dario Amodei, have become respectively one of the most important companies in the world and one of the most important people in the world. And earlier in April, they decided not to release their new class of models, the Mythos class. If you're familiar with Anthropic and Claude, you might be familiar with the Haiku class, Sonnet class, Opus class of models, sort of named music and poetry. They have another class they've been working on called Mythos that is apparently much more capable than this class. They decided not to release this because it turns out that Mythos is perhaps an order of magnitude better at finding software vulnerabilities than currently available models. And so Anthropic put the brakes on this, announced what it was doing. It said, we're not ready to release this yet. We're too concerned about the implications of releasing this wide because it could be used to hack into banking systems, for instance, or into utilities or practically anything else. Cut through security like a knife through hot butter. And instead, it created a consortium called Project Glasswing and invited a lot of the most important technology companies in the world to have early access to this tool to use it to patch these security vulnerabilities that this model was finding. So Anthropic basically adopted the responsible path here, which is good, but it caused quite a bit of consternation, including at the highest levels of the US government, where Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, called an emergency meeting with the heads of all the major US banks, including, I think, what was it? Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, Citigroup. This all went down 2 weeks ago, April 7th through 10th, or I guess 2 to 3 weeks ago. It was an emergency meeting in DC, basically discussing the implications of this type of model getting out into the wild, right, Galen? And to be clear, it is not out in the wild, although there has been a breach, and we'll get into that. It seems like the barriers are holding, but there's a lot of reasons to be concerned. And like, you just don't see this happening every day. It's like all of the heads of, the most important banks in the US getting called to DC to talk with cabinet level officials, right? So yeah, we wanted to go back and take an extra close look at this because it relates to some things we've been talking about. And yeah, it could represent a completely new front in cybersecurity. So first, I want to take your temperature on what you thought when you saw this originally and kind of what you think now. How big of a deal is this?
Yeah, I'm going to use a cop out at the beginning and say, I would say there's much more we don't know yet than we do know. So it's a
Always.
little hard to say. I'll freely admit this isn't the best of reasons, but I tend to be inherently skeptical of,
Claims.
yeah, I mean, that this is going to somehow completely change the world. I think that's probably where I'm still at. I tilt more toward it's going to be okay. That said, I have read a fair amount of the reporting as you have, and it seems like a pretty powerful tool. And I would say, I think we'll get to this in a bit, at least in the short term, there does seem to be a danger until we kind of like figure out how to adapt. Over the
Hmm.
longer term, for now, I'll say like I think there might be reasons to be actually somewhat positive about this in that it might actually strengthen cybersecurity defenses to some extent. So I would say like I'm in the middle, but tilting toward it's going to be okay for now.
I
What about
like
you?
that. Yeah, I think that's probably true. There are a number of open questions relating to whether we can keep this model out of the wild
Yeah.
long enough to patch the security capabilities, number one. And number two, whether more, shall we say, or less responsible actors could develop equivalent models and kind of not do the responsible things with them fast enough. By the way, you're not the only one who has been skeptical of these claims. Like there's a sizable minority of people who really know what they're talking about who took a look at this and were like, "Oh, this is some brilliant marketing for Anthropic." It's like, "Oh, we have this thing that's so good that you
Yeah.
can't actually have it yet." It's like,
Look,
"Oh, that's
it's
that's pretty good." Like,
no, I mean, like, I can't say I don't work at Anthropic, and even if I
Yeah.
did, wouldn't tell me what if that was a marketing gimmick, but that's not really where I'm coming from. That might be
Yeah.
true. I'm more like, we'll get to this later, but generally a reaction has an equal and opposite reaction. And I think
Yes.
like this will stimulate countermeasures and in fact could be a very powerful countermeasure of its own.
Mhm.
I understand though why people are worried like in the here and now for reasons I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah. Yeah, people are definitely concerned. And so maybe now is a good time to double click on kind of what is so concerning about
Yeah.
Mythos and what it is able to do at a higher level that previous models have not been able to do. So, according to what we've read and what I understand, and listening to some podcasts, from people who know what they're talking about, like the basic idea here is that if you are trying to find security vulnerabilities, there's kind of two ways to do that. One is to go to software that is live on the internet and just try a bunch of standard tricks to break in. So there's this idea of the security primitive, right? And it's like different ways to break encryption, different ways to look for ways into systems that may not have been covered. And there's a whole library of these standard tricks that you can use. And what Mythos is able to do is it's able to basically test all of these in every combination available really, really fast to locate backdoors and exploits on software that is live, such as web browsers, for instance, that transmit, encrypted banking details, let's say, or, secured systems. You might have a portal for the US government that requires credentials, right? There's ways into and around that stuff too, that where you can just, it's like having a giant ring of keys and being able to use every single key on that really fast. And then if none of those work, pick up another keychain, right? And just have like 1,000 keychains, right? Mythos can do that. So that's
Yeah.
for software that is live. For software that is not live and open source, and there is a ton of software that is open source that is freely available on services like GitHub. You can go to GitHub and download foundational software that
Yeah. Much of the internet runs on
much
it.
of the internet runs on. 90% of the internet uses these open source libraries that do really basic stuff that in some cases have been around for like 30 plus years and have been versioned hundreds of times and have had people look at it for decades, like really smart people. And they're just constantly being updated and patched. And like it's been inspected and used ad nauseum. And we thought it was secure. Guess what? It's not secure. Like Mythos looks at this stuff and finds new exploits after 30 years of people looking at this stuff in detail. And that is really notable because, again, The way software engineering works now is it's not so much about like writing code just from scratch in a coding language. It's about taking these building blocks and assembling them in different ways. And if your foundation is rotten as a result of having these previously unexamined, unfound cracks in your foundation from these foundational libraries that everybody uses, it's like that's a big problem for all this live software, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it might be useful to just like talk a little bit about how this traditionally works, right?
Yeah.
So, like, you know, code traditionally was written by humans.
Mm-hmm.
Humans make mistakes. And so code will have bugs in it. Sometimes those bugs enable a functionality that was not intended to be written into the code. And sometimes that functionality can be exploited to attack a system. So, like in the past, the main ways to do this were you could be a security researcher and you could spend, in some cases, like months and months and months digging for these things, doing kind of like deep analysis of code. I randomly one time was seated next to someone on an airplane who was one of these people, and he was like, "Yeah, like sometimes you're just like doing this for months on end, and like, why do I exist?"
That's crazy.
Until you find it. And then another form is fuzzing, which you might be able to explain more eloquently than I can, but my understand is basically like you have an automated program that throws lots of data and junk and different commands at systems and like sees what breaks.
Yep.
And so it's like a more, I guess, like industrialized process. The point is like what you're saying is key about this is the rapidity and the like incredible speed
Hmm.
to which this new piece of AI can find these things. Like in the past, if people are interested, Nicole Perlroth used to be like the cybersecurity reporter for the New York Times book. This is how they tell me the world ends. Like describes how 0-day markets, that's what these vulnerabilities are called, 0-day vulnerabilities, so named because no one knows about them and therefore they have had 0 days to take action to defend against them.
Right. They're just landmines. They're just sitting there, right?
But by definition, you cannot play defense against them because people do not know that they exist.
Yep.
Like, governments used to pay top dollar for something like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars if it was a severe enough bug. And you could write an exploit that took advantage of it in a way that yielded useful intelligence or something like that. This seems to potentially be able to skip all of that. And as you said, like some of these bugs are more than a quarter of a century old. I haven't seen a ton of reporting as to the severity of these bugs,
Mm-hmm.
which matters, right? Like, you know, if you can break into a place and there's nothing in there,
Yeah.
it's unclear how useful that is, but
It's finding critical exploits
okay.
in like sort of key open source libraries
And
that
that's important
yeah.
too, that it can write the exploits, right? And
Mm-hmm.
do so quickly. Just because you found a bug doesn't necessarily mean you can exploit it.
Exactly. And just to give you an idea, so like again, current reporting suggests that this is a little bit more a difference of degree rather than a difference in kind. And just to give you an idea, it's like I think the CEO of Mozilla, the company that makes the web browser Firefox, which is, not that big of a deal anymore, but still used by hundreds of millions of people all over the world, basically came out and said the game has changed. So the last publicly available model from Anthropic, the best one, was Opus 4.6. They just released Opus 4.7 earlier this week, but
Mm.
4.6 last month. They tested against, I think it was Firefox version 148, and it found 20 vulnerabilities. Not bad. Pretty good. Perhaps as good as like, a good human security team working together. And by the way, Firefox has that team, right? They are part of Project Glasswing, so they have access to this early preview version of Mythos. They tested it against Firefox version 150. So basically, the next version or the next one away from the next version, or two away rather. and the same type of software, very close. And I think that Mythos found over 200 vulnerabilities, and it did it fast. That's an order of magnitude change. And like a good rule of thumb in life when looking at anything, any process, is if it changes basically overnight by an order of magnitude, you should probably pay attention, right?
Yes.
And so
I like that as a rule of thumb. Yeah.
it's a
It's
good rule. It's a good heuristic, right? And but what this guy said, what the CEO of Mozilla said is like he's actually happy about it because, well, for two reasons. One is he has early access to the tech, so he gets to fix all this stuff and make his software
sure.
secure. And it's not just him, like, like Apple has access and Amazon has access. It's like all the foundational companies you would want to have access are getting early access so they can clean this stuff up before Mythos goes wide at some point. And the preview, Glasswing's supposed to like basically stop and report in I think June or July, so it has a few more months to run. But he was like, once everybody has access to this software, all the new software that they write will basically not have any more 0 days in it because like we can invert this power and use it for
Yeah.
defense instead of offense. So it's like this is actually great news. The problem is going back and fixing those like tens of thousands of open source libraries and like every deployed piece of software on the internet, right?
Yeah. So can I actually just, since we're on it now, like
Yeah.
this is perhaps the main reason I think this could potentially be good news.
Yeah.
And this was a big, arguably like the main plank in the Biden administration's cyber national security strategy,
Mm.
which was like, we don't accept this in other areas of life, right? If you want to sell cars in the United States, you have to have seatbelts.
Yep.
You have to have airbags, right? Like we regulate other industries like that. Software, like there is such a market incentive to get this stuff out very, very quickly. And like in the battle days back, like pre 9/11, basically, like Microsoft in particular was like notorious for having tons of bugs in a lot of its stuff. And apparently the Bush White House after 9/11 was like, hey, if you want the government to keep using your stuff, you need to get your shit together. And that basically led to a major change. And Microsoft has much better security now. But that market incentive is still there. And so a lot of these products get rushed out with security vulnerabilities built into them. And so if we get to a point where stuff like Claude Code is writing much more secure code without any of these vulnerabilities, that has the potential to like really tilt things back toward the defense. But again, sorry to interrupt. I just like that struck me as an important point.
Oh, it's a super important point. And this relates to, a key aspect of international relations theory that we've come back to many times, both in this context and in other contexts, offense defense theory. It's like most military technologies can be used for both offense and defense. You think about a shield, right? Like sword and shield. It's like, oh, you think that like that's a defensive weapon, right? But if you kind of think about it more carefully, you're like, well, it also protects you while you're going in to hit the guy with your sword. Also, you can hit him in the face with your shield. So
Yeah.
same goes with artillery, right?
Yeah. Favorite example to like build that out a bit is like the 1973 Middle East War. Like the reason Egypt was able to cross the Suez Canal was because they had this incredibly dense surface to air missile network that is usually considered a defensive weapon system, but they were able to neutralize Israeli air power while their troops crossed the canal. So like
it
it was
defended their
leveraged
attack. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's so much of it comes down to like tactics and tactical innovation. And we're talking about exactly the same idea with Mythos in cybersecurity. It's like, okay, like it's located all these 0-day exploits. It can be used just as easily in software development to make sure there aren't any 0-day exploits. But it's like there's going to be a lag where we have to go back and catch up. And that's one of the concerns. Right now, like Mythos is, confined supposedly to Project Glasswing, except that we just saw reported that some people have gained unauthorized access to it through a third-party contractor, and it's not super clear who they are. They seem to be enthusiasts who kind of like to like hunt around and search for models before they're released, and like, I'm drawing a kind of a weird parallel here, but like in the Tesla owner community, there are people that go into like the software and look for evidence of like the new like self-driving software that's going to be launched, and like they're trying to find traces in the code. They're
Uh,
nerds basically. And I kind of got the sense that like, yeah, this is a pack of nerds who are super into models, and they like Anthropic left this model kind of in the same place that it leaves its other models. Whoops. And they gained access to it that way, and they had a third party relationship. It doesn't sound like they're using it to hack into anything, which is
I didn't
good.
see anything indicating that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, so did you take it from them? Like, you might want to.
Well, it's also like, if that's happening, which I would say I thought that was inevitable. I didn't think it would happen necessarily this quickly.
Right.
But like if that's happened, you have to think about, nation state, what we call advanced persistent threats, right? Like they're going to be interested in getting this too. So that's something to watch.
Yep. They're definitely going to be interested, and looking at people who work at Anthropic and being like, okay, are any of these people in debt? Are they drug addicts? Can they perhaps be tempted by members of the opposite sex? All the things that intelligence services do, right? So then you're like, okay, Anthropic, you need probably nation state level security for this stuff. Like they're doing Glasswing on its own initiative. We described earlier, well, maybe we haven't described the relationship between Anthropic and the Trump administration, which has been fraught. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Brott is putting it nicely. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, look, I mean, my understanding is, and so Anthropic, like the people at Anthropic used to be at OpenAI.
Yeah.
Like that's where they got their start. And they split out of a concern, which I share, that like we are charging full speed ahead with pretty much no regard for like what the potential consequences, whether they be political, economic, social, like what have you.
I've heard this described as not a zero regulation environment, but like a negative regulation environment.
Well, that
It's like the
seems to
government
be
is,
yeah,
yeah,
that's like the White House's policy, right? Is like,
we want more of this.
it's,
Like, yeah, like as fast as possible. Like, and there's reasons for that. It's like we were racing the Chinese, and
yeah,
whoever gets to super intelligence first will win the 21st century. And it's like, okay, like that's a reasonable argument, but we don't want to have like a crash on the way there, you know?
yeah. I mean, maybe next week or something, we should do like the super intelligence. I think Putin said in like 2017, whoever like wins AI will rule the world or something. Like we
Mm-hmm.
should probably debate that. That's like a hot debate as well. But like,
That's a good idea. Yeah.
but your point, like, yes, that was one of the justifications. Much like any other thing related to national security,
Right.
like we live in an anarchic environment, and like whoever gets there first will have an upper hand.
Yep.
But the folks in Anthropic were like, maybe we should like chill and like see what this stuff can do, and like try to be a little responsible about it. So when was this? Like in March, right? They had kind of a falling out with the Pentagon because
It's been ongoing. Yeah, it's
okay,
been longer than that. They got into it with Hegseth,
yes, who just fired, I forget who
Secretary
it
of the
was.
Navy.
Yes. So that's
Yeah.
another high ranking military official gone, but that's a story for another day.
Yeah.
Anyway, like Anthropic doesn't want the Pentagon doing things like using its AI for things like autonomous weapon systems.
Hmm.
Like maybe there should be a national discussion about whether we want to do that first, and
Creating the Terminator. Yeah.
yeah. So like the Pentagon then pulled out like kind of the nuclear option in some ways and decided to label Anthropic a supply chain risk,
It's a disaster.
which is like really going after its ability to survive as a company. Now, as you said, it has not worked.
Yeah.
The company has like become even more valuable. But when Mythos got announced, the White House was like, whoa, all right,
Yeah.
like
Let's
That's
talk.
interesting. The NSA might want to like take a look at that. So like maybe we should try to like cool this off a bit. Maybe we can work something out.
Yeah, bring you guys back in. Yeah, sorry we were a little hasty there. Yeah, the supply chain risk designation is it's basically like secondary sanctions. Is my
Yeah,
understanding. It's like anybody who does
that's a good
business with
analogy. Yeah.
yeah, anybody who does business with the federal government cannot do business with Anthropic because they have cooties basically, and they're run by radical left lunatics, as Trump I think has said. I don't know whether or not that's true. I think it's more that Dario Amodei is serious. He's one of the more serious people in his position about trying to do things responsibly. And like, has he been fully responsible? No. Like, he's also running a business, and like, they've done some stuff that has gotten them sued, and will do more stuff that will get them sued, and probably some unethical things. But like, comparatively speaking, they're one of the more ethical companies that are working on this stuff. And the other thing I'll say, though, by the way, is there's evidence that the U.S. military has been using Claude for targeting in the Iran war,
Yeah.
right? So they didn't necessarily have a compunction about that, and Palantir and all the rest of it, right? And maybe we can do another episode at some point on like the U.S. government's use of AI, which I think is pretty interesting since this administration is so AI forward and
Hmm.
has deep relationships with people like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, not so much Amadei, right? But
Yeah.
that relationship is becoming steadily more important, right? This guy has gone from being not very well known a few years ago to literally being one of the most 10 most powerful people on earth,
Yeah.
probably.
Actually, like just as a point of curiosity, because I feel like you'll know way more about this than I like is Anthropic just that good? Or
Yes.
like are they just better? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Here's what they did. They focused on software development. So OpenAI had pole position basically up until 6 months ago. But they have been like broad consumer, like talk to Chat GPT and like get answers from it. It's like, no, we're going to do software development. And they made it so good that now anybody can do software development.
Yeah. Yeah.
And ChatGPT or AI was kind of asleep at the wheel while this was happening. They're racing to catch up, and I think they can conceivably, but like what's happened now is Anthropic is using Claude to build Claude.
Yeah. No, I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So it's evolving incredibly fast. They ship a new version of this stuff literally every day. Which and like adding features, and it's just like this is why they've gone geometric. Yeah, they call it hockey stick. It's like, yeah, it's hockey stick, man.
mm,
Like it's hockey stick like we've never seen before. So that's why they are where they are. And look, the other frontier labs have frontier models. AI has a model that they're not releasing to the public, and they're doing something kind of like Glasswing, apparently. That's good. It also makes me wonder if it's kind of like a Me Too thing because they don't want to lose out on the hype, because they are trying to like basically they're fighting for their life.
yeah.
And they went from pole position to not that in a hurry. But yes, the bottom line is Claude is that good.
Okay.
Anthropic is that good.
Okay. One other sort of semi-technical point we forgot to mention. The other thing I read that it does quite well, that being Mythos, just because you've got a 0-day exploit, like you might need multiple ones to
Yep.
pull off whatever you're doing.
An actual cyber attack. Yeah.
Yes. And chaining those together is not necessarily a straightforward process. So like I think we talked about Stuxnet before on the show, the most famous cyber attack in history. That like the later versions of that attack, which targeted Iran's nuclear enrichment facility at Natanz, I think used 7 0-day exploits.
I didn't know
Uh,
that.
the earlier versions used, I think, 4. And some of these have to be like chained together, right? To facilitate the attack. My understanding is Mythos actually does that too quite well. So that's another way
It's
that
this like yeah, it's this idea of taking the basics, the building blocks, the keys, the foundational layers, and just very quickly being able to test all the combinations, whether it's an attack or in a defense, either way. It's just
yeah.
like it's just faster. And the faster a model is, the more thorough it can be, right? So it can be both very fast and very thorough.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, do you want me to like lay out some of my points of skepticism and
Please
maybe?
do.
All right.
Let's go
So,
through them.
well, all right. We've already talked about how like potentially over the long term this could be
Be
good
good.
news.
Yeah.
So I'll leave that aside for now. I guess one of the big ones for me is that, like, you see this from people that work in cybersecurity all the time. Like, a lot of the biggest hacks don't rely on zero-day exploits. Like,
Yeah.
some of the most prominent ones ever, like the Clinton campaign getting hacked by the Russians in 2016. Her campaign manager, John Podesta, got a phishing email,
Yeah. Social engineering, spear
and like,
phishing. Yeah.
you know, it was something like at least the guy who was in charge of this later claimed he wrote like, I guess he got an email being like, is this legitimate? And he said it's legitimate. And he said he meant to write illegitimate.
But her
Whether that's
emails.
true or not, I don't know, but that's like what some of the reporting said. One of my favorite ones to discuss, like Equifax, when that credit ratings agency gave China like 150 million Americans most sensitive data.
Yeah.
Um, like that was not a zero day. There was a vulnerability that was found and listed in one of the CVEs, the critical vulnerability and enumerations, I think, in Apache Struts software. And they just didn't patch it because they had a poor like method of internal email communication. And beyond that, like once they got through there, they did not follow the principle of least privilege, which means like give people the privileges they need and nothing else. And like you
Yeah.
could get into somebody's servers and then
Basic,
like,
basic, yeah,
yeah,
basic hygiene stuff, right? Like security hygiene. And like, that's like a, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed
yeah.
type thing.
Or as one analyst who was discussing Equifax put it, I can't remember who it was, but he said, look, I can't fix stupid.
Yeah.
Uh,
Exactly.
so like, another one that people worry about a lot, like I worry about it, critical infrastructure,
Hmm.
power grids, water treatment plants,
Traffic lights.
critical transportation systems. Yeah. Like some of that stuff by many accounts relies on legacy software, like
Very,
really
very
outdated
legacy.
systems that like legacy means it is no longer receiving security updates.
Hmm.
I think like I've read like a lot of our trains rely on, pretty dated stuff like Windows XP. Um,
Mm.
so like that hasn't been attacked yet. And I suspect that's because there hasn't been a political incentive large enough for a foreign actor to do that. The
Yeah.
one I kind of want to hear you talk about, and like we've talked also at length about like this is how arms races work, right? Like you build bombers, we build air defenses, you build tanks, people anti-tank missiles, right? So like
Yeah.
this could follow that pattern. The one that I am not sure of, at least during this critical gap period you mentioned, is like non-state actors. And
Right.
I tend to be a little more skeptical of that just because I've seen the argument before, whether it was like after 9/11 or, you know,
So,
we've seen that with drones before, but like some of these bigger stuff, like if you go and look at Stuxnet, that's an air-gapped facility. In other words, it's not connected to the internet. You needed human assets, i.e. spies, to go do that stuff. Like it
right.
had stolen legitimate digital certificates built into the code. These things are kept under like heavy security. You would have needed a spy to go in and steal that stuff.
Yep.
But the fact that, as you said, Besant and Powell are having this emergency meeting, I don't know what that means in terms of non-state actors potentially doing stuff like hacking banks. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. My impression of Besant and Powell doing what they did is, making the banks aware that this was a thing. And my hope would be, because I think this is the case, is like not that this is going to happen tomorrow. It's more like this is a low risk but high impact thing that can now happen. So it's like this is a new class of thing that we need to start thinking about. But they did it urgently, right?
Yeah.
In a way that we just haven't seen before, which was interesting. So yeah, whether this is, like an Oppenheimer moment, something like that,
So when you say high impact, because like the part of me, obviously, of course, was like, okay, how does this affect me directly?
Of course.
like, like, it's like all the standard stuff, like don't reuse passwords, don't use bad pass or weak passwords, enable
Yeah.
multi-factor authentication. Like if you can, have it be the stronger form.
So this is not that. This
Yeah.
is you're at war with Iran and they decide to take all of America's banks offline
Okay.
so that nobody can access their accounts.
So like a DDoS.
Like a DDoS or some other type of attack that wipes out, like critical infrastructure. It's distributed, so it would be hard, but like
Yeah.
it's that type of thing. It's not
Well, and
like
and and Iran has done that, by the way, toward American financial institutions in
Mhm.
retaliation for Stuxnet. They took
Yeah.
American banks offline for a
No,
while.
it's not so much like you personally are going to get targeted. It's like millions of people will be unable to like access their money or move it around for some period of time, which just think about it. Like that's chaos. Utter chaos, right?
Yeah.
Like how do you dig out from that? It's a massive vulnerability.
So okay, then I'll throw my next thing at you, and it's like, yeah, like that's interesting because it's in the context of an ongoing shooting war,
Yeah.
where I guess for now the shooting has stopped, but
Yeah.
we're still in a conflict. Well, I can't remember if we talked about NotPetya when Russia attacked
We did.
Ukraine in
Yeah, the bank
2017.
banking
Okay,
attack, yeah.
that is the most damaging or most costly cyber attack to date in history. Caused like at least $10 billion globally.
Yeah.
And it's like you go read about it. It's kind of the stuff you're saying, like people can't use ATMs, they can't, get on public transit systems, they can't use point of sale systems. So like you don't have cash on you, you can't buy groceries. And it like kind of sounds similar, like when people described it in the literature, like as disorienting and like
Mhm.
scary, like
Mhm.
not something going boom type of terrorist attack, but like a psychological attack.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to like be too dismissive of it, but like I always ask people, like, have you ever heard of NotPetya? And
No.
overwhelmingly the answer is like no.
No, because like it happened in Ukraine mostly. I
Yeah.
don't know how many people within Ukraine were affected at the same time. Did it affect the entire country?
I think it was 10% of Windows computers in the country were taken down, which is like an
Okay, so that's
astonishing number.
yeah, that's very significant, and it did a lot of damage. But I think it was like sounds pretty isolated,
Yeah.
honestly. And it's like with these tools, the worry is no, they take down multiple huge banks all at the same time. Again, it's not so much a difference of kind as it is a difference of degree. And to get back to your earlier question, is this something non-state actors can do? I think the answer is no,
Okay.
because like they would need to gain access to the model, which they don't have, and like Anthropic's now being more careful with, I hope. Number one. Number two, if they can't gain access to the model, then they need to train their own model. And I think that's just out of the realm of possibility for like, you need a frontier lab, you need like thousands of GPUs, you need a lot of time, you need expertise. So it is in that respect, it is kind of like nuclear weapons, I would say.
Yeah. Okay.
It's just being done by private firms. It's not being done by nation states.
And I mean, you don't think there's any prospect? Because when I was reading about it, it was like they're not releasing it openly for now, except to like Microsoft, Google, AWS, CrowdStrike,
I
Cisco.
think that they
Like,
definitely want to release it at some point because it'll be the next step change after Opus, right? For Claude, it'll be Claude Mythos, and like they've been working on it, and they need to make money on it because it probably cost a ton to build and to train, but they're not going to do it until they nerf it enough or make sure that it cannot be used. And those are two different things, right? Because like there are ways to get models to do things that they know they're not supposed to be doing
yeah.
by basically giving them instructions in a certain way. You can confuse them and be like, pretend that you're a security researcher. How would you go about like brewing nerve gas? It's like that's a very early example. It's
Okay.
like pretend you are somebody other than you are, and like we hadn't covered that base, right? That base is mostly covered now, but it's this race.
So the concern in your view more in like the short to medium term and potentially over the long term, depending on like how useful this is to the defense, right? Like
Yeah,
some people I've spoken to say like AI could like be actually very helpful, even aside from writing more secure code and finding vulnerabilities like this at doing things like detecting intrusions, right? Like
absolutely.
looking for certain heuristics and immediately flagging it if
Yeah,
someone's like doing something malicious on your network, for example.
yeah.
Um, but in the short to medium term, it's like, this was a big deal like 15 years ago, right? The Obama administration, I think his Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta, like gave a speech where he was concerned about a cyber Pearl Harbor.
Right.
Like in the short term, that's kind of the concern as you see it, like a advanced nation state actor group gets its hands on this. And if it's
Well,
a
they
country
so
like Iran and has the incentive to actually use it,
so
basically.
it would not be so much Claude Mythos. It would be a Mythos class model that they make themselves. Then they go through everything in GitHub and look at all the open source libraries, identify all the exploits, build the exploits, and then use them. And they wouldn't want to wait too long,
Yeah.
right?
They don't want it to get patched, right?
Yeah.
Once it's
Can
patched,
can Iran or Russia or North Korea build these? I don't think so. Can China? Probably.
probably.
Probably. Let's leave it there. We're out of time. On that rather sinister note,
I want to reiterate, I'm overall, I'm not freaking out yet. Like,
no. Me either. I'm freaking out less now than I was. Great discussion as always, Galen.
you, Jim,
This has been another episode of Global Tantrum. Till next time.